don't think about that and how it impacts our physical and mental health. And so as you learned this evening, hopefully as you went through the tables, the Summit County Health Department, in partnership with our Sustainability Department, is committed to continuing this conversation and not letting it rest. I am very excited about the professionals that we have here this evening to talk about this and share what they're doing in the academic and professional arena to also continue this conversation. So just a couple of housekeeping items. Unfortunately, we don't have a Wi-Fi password, so we did that on purpose so you have to pay attention. So I learned that from my daughter who's in high school, that if you cut off the Wi-Fi, you actually have to pay attention to what's going on. So we don't have Wi-Fi, I apologize about that. But the plan is we're going to turn it over to our moderator here in just a second, and we're really going to go through and hit on some hard-hitting topics. It's going to be maybe a little uncomfortable for some. Others, it might be just in line with what they were thinking. But nonetheless, we're not shying away from the tough conversations. We're going to have those here tonight, and we're going to continue to have them in the future. So again, thank you for your time. I know it's an awkward time on a Tuesday at 5:30 or 6, but we're happy you're here. We're happy that you're going to share this time with us, and hopefully you walk away with something that you're able to implement, or a behavior change, or a person or an individual change that you can put into play to make things better, more efficient, more sustainable. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator tonight, Alexis. It's a very informal event, so we're not using official titles, we're not doing any of that. This is just really a conversation among friends, colleagues, stakeholders, and those who share a common interest. So thank you. Alexis, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Hi folks, my name is Alexis, and I'm going to be your cruise director tonight. I think I'll probably call up our three panelists, if that's okay. So first we're going to have Kimberly Schoaf. She is from the University of Utah Public Health Department. Welcome, Kimberly. And then next we will have Jeremy Becker will be speaking. He is a PhD student at Brigham Young University. And then last we're going to have Natanya Kay. She is with the Hudson Mental Health Institute. So thank you three for joining us. Each of our panelists tonight have actually prepared a few things to kind of bring us all up to speed and build a common ground of understanding. So we'll let each of the three of them kind of run through their content, and then we'll have some time for Q&A from all of you. And I have a few backups, but I've been told that this is a very inquisitive group, so I'm hoping to yield the floor mostly to your questions when we get to the end. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly is talking first. So I'll hand you the floor.
And please, I apologize in advance because I have a voice that tends to, this microphone just really sort of shoot to the back of the room, so I will go ahead. Okay.
I think somebody's got
There we go, slides, there we go. We can go to the second slide. Sherry told me who I am, so we know that. So we'll go ahead to the second slide. I wanted to talk a little bit about, as Phil said, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we get from the climate change to the impacts on the environment and on our weather patterns and other things, and then to talk about the physical health impacts of climate change. So that's really what I want to talk about this evening. And when we look at this, there are a number of different exposure pathways that climate change can affect our health through. They can affect our health through some of the different extremes that Phil mentioned, extreme heat, extreme weather patterns, extreme drought, anything that you can think of in terms of weather. Think about those in the extreme, right? And extreme heat, extreme cold, extreme wet, extreme dry. And sometimes in the areas where we expect to see, and we live in a dry climate here in Utah, with climate change, it's actually, we're likely to see more rain events and more snow events. So it's likely to be wetter and more humid than what we're accustomed to. Now, I moved from the East Coast. I don't like humidity. I love living in the West where there's no humidity. So, if we're going to start seeing more humidity, that might make me a little irritable to see a lot of humidity. All of those things are going to impact a number of different things. They can impact our food, and so thinking about food security, the things that normally grow because we have good climate, because of our climate, may not be able to grow as well. Sometimes they'll overgrow. So I have Virginia creeper in my backyard. it has overgrown, right? from all the rain that we had this past season. And so patterns of food growth patterns are going to be different. Similarly, livestock, right, are going to be impacted. And so we could end up with food insecurity as a result of climate change. And the food quality may differ because of the nutrients in the soil might get washed away and things like that. I was talking before this with a colleague here about changes in infectious disease patterns for a lot of different reasons, and I'll talk a little bit about that, a little bit more about how that happens and how we might see some of those changes in infectious disease patterns. Population displacement on really large scales, as we see climate change impacting like island nations that all of a sudden are now with the ocean change, rise in ocean levels, that we may end up seeing large population displacements from island nations, from small island nations. That may be one of the first large population displacements that we see. But also population displacements from areas that previously could support agriculture that now cannot support agriculture, and those populations moving more, and they move more to the cities, and as those populations move to cities, we end up with more concrete, which ends up increasing climate change, which makes that everything just sort of repeats that cycle. So it really is a lot of a sort of catch-22 where we just keep repeating that cycle. All those things can increase and can change our health outcomes. Everything from heat-related illnesses, cardiovascular illnesses, infectious diseases, water and food and vector-borne diseases, and then the mental health consequences and stress. So there are a lot of different things that come through these pathways. It's not necessarily this nice direct, oh, it's warmer, therefore we have this, but really a lot of different pathways that are affecting our health. Next slide, please. So these are some potential health impacts that can come from climate change. Injuries, we don't necessarily think a lot about injuries, but when we think about climate change, we are more likely to see extreme events. We're likely to see more disasters, more weather-related disasters. Weather-related disasters result in injuries. And so we can see an increase in injuries. And different types of injuries sometimes, right, than what we're normally accustomed to. Vector-borne diseases, this is one of the things that we are seeing in the last couple of years. We've really started to see some changes and some upticks in vector-borne diseases. Lyme disease, right, as Lyme disease has moved across the country because the ticks have moved across the country, we're starting. When I moved here 9 years ago, oh, there's no Lyme disease in Utah. There's Lyme disease in Utah now. And it has happened very quickly. In the last year, typhus, I don't know if any of you know about tick-borne typhus. Los Angeles had 3 deaths last year from tick-borne typhus. They haven't seen that in decades. And so seeing an increase in those vector-borne diseases because the vectors are able to survive. I don't know, I'm sure many of you heard on the news that we've had cases of domestically acquired malaria in the United States. In Texas, none of us were surprised that we saw malaria in Texas. We've had dengue in Texas for a long time. We expected to see malaria. Also, about 8 cases as well in Florida. Not surprising, a lot of humidity, a lot of mosquitoes in Florida, but we haven't seen domestically acquired cases, more than 1 or 2. And usually, you see the cases, but not necessarily infected pods of mosquitoes. And they found not only cases, human cases, but mosquitoes as well that were carrying malaria in Florida. And most recently, a couple of cases in the Washington, D.C. area. They did drain the swamp to build Washington, D.C. I don't know how much it's been drained. Maybe that's probably a problem. Maybe we need to drain that swamp again to get rid of those mosquitoes. I'm just talking about mosquitoes. I don't know. So, vector-borne diseases are certainly something that we're going to see more of with climate change. We're also going to see more waterborne diseases and different patterns of waterborne diseases. I was talking with a colleague who researches cholera, and He's like, well, and we're putting in a grant about climate change and health, and I'm like, why aren't we looking at waterborne diseases? That's what you specialize in. He's like, well, is that really what we're gonna see in the United States? And I'm like, why not, right? All it takes is somebody with the disease, a breakdown in our sanitation system, and then we can see those kinds of waterborne diseases. A lot of that is not just because of increased rainfall or more flooding, but it's also a result of things like increased wildfires. I have a conference next week on public health and disaster. We have a speaker coming from Las Vegas, New Mexico, to talk about the fact they had wildfires in their community. Those wildfires contaminated their water source for their city, and then they ran out of water. Well, when you run out of potable water, what happens? People are drinking water that is not necessarily well treated water. They're bringing water in. They're storing water. It's an opportunity for an infectious agent to get into the water system. And once it's in the water system and once it's in the population, then it can spread if we're not incredibly careful. So waterborne diseases are another problem. Heat-related illness. We've already started to see that. A lot of the strike that the UPS workers this past year, a lot of their issues was about the fact that they were, because of the increase in heat, because of climate change, that they're in trucks that are not air conditioned. And they've had trucks that weren't air conditioned for years, but it's finally gotten to the point where they just cannot survive the summers in those trucks that are not air conditioned. My husband's a FedEx courier. Even in his air-conditioned truck, it doesn't always work really well. And when you stop and open the door and get out, and then come back in, and then stop and open, then it can't keep the truck cool enough because of the heat, because of that radiating heat. It really is. We're going to see that kind of thing going on. Respiratory health. We all know about increased dust and other things, smog, air pollution that's going to affect our respiratory health. That also affects not just our lungs, but also our cardiovascular system. Anything that's going to affect your lungs is also likely to affect your cardiovascular system. Mental health, my colleagues here are going to talk a lot about that. Malnutrition, as we talked about, food scarcity, that we can see that. Slide. I'm actually going to talk about. See, I always do this. I always talk about it, and then this slide comes up. So we can continue on. Those lovely mosquitoes and ticks. The typhus cases, Rocky Mountain spotted fever in Mexico and in southwestern United States. We're seeing that as well. Next. This is the slide I wanted to get to. We are going to see more and more disasters, more and more climate-related disasters because of climate change. And the question is, hurricanes. Okay. I would say that I don't think we're at risk for hurricanes here in Utah. However, I used to say Los Angeles was not at risk for hurricanes either. And we saw a hurricane in Los Angeles a few weeks ago. And we did see the outer bands of rain from that hurricane reach Utah. And so I'm not going to say we're not at risk for that anymore. I'll just say that we're probably not at risk of a direct hit. Wildfires. The increase in wildfires over the last few years, really since 2018, every year after year after year, we have had the biggest and deadliest wildfires each year here in the western part of the United States. We're seeing similar things now in Canada. Everybody saw the horrific wildfire in Maui a couple of weeks ago, and just really thinking about all of the potential impacts that come from those kinds of wildfires. Flooding and drought, and the extremes, right? Flooding and drought. We will see both of those things. Right now, I know that Vicki Thomas, we're out of drought in Utah. Don't blink, because as soon as you blink, we'll be back in drought again. And we will go through these cycles over and over again. Next slide, please. As we think about these things, some of the things we need to think about with to wreak havoc and create problems even after the initial event has occurred. With flooding, one of the things, when the hurricane hit Los Angeles and then we had an earthquake, everybody said, oh, it was a little earthquake, nobody really cared about it. And what does that have to do with the hurricane? Well, it doesn't necessarily, but because of the hurricane, because the ground was saturated, they ended up with lots of landslides, and I knew that would happen. I knew that earthquake was going to generate landslides because the ground was saturated. It impacts water quality, increases mosquitoes as if we need more mosquitoes, and then we've got the problem of mold, and all of those things then carry secondary health risks associated with them. Similarly with drought, we see water availability issues with drought, and more wildfires, crop failure, food insecurity. So really thinking about how these disasters can impact us. And I think I just have one more slide. No, I have two, but I already talked about this one, so go ahead to the next one. These are the things that I want us to think about. The question is, are our health systems, both our public health system and our health care system, are they prepared for repeat, concurrent, and cascading disaster events like we're talking about here? COVID-19 almost destroyed our public health system. Right? Every public health person in this state has suffered the exhaustion from that event. And when we had natural disasters on top of those things, and during that pandemic, it took our public health system and stretched it to the breaking point. Do we have the extra capacity to be able to deal with event after event after event? Our health care system. There was a lot of talk during COVID-19 about the impact on the health care system, particularly on our nursing staff. And do we have the health care capacity to deal with large numbers of people, large influxes into our health care system at a point in time when they're stretched from other events, from other types of things? And so really looking at, are our systems prepared, and are you prepared to be able to deal with those things on your own if our health system is not available to be able to meet those needs? Okay, so now I've depressed you. So now I'm going to turn it over to the next people to talk about those mental health impacts.
Thank you, Kimberly. Yeah, we'll pass it over to Jeremy now.
Yeah, I don't think you really want to feel worse, but it might make you feel a little bit worse.
Then you'll be feeling better.
You'll be feeling so good. So yeah, I'm Jeremy, clinician in training at BYU. So I'm not speaking as a therapist today, but as a mental health expert in training. So go ahead and go to the next slide after this one. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to talk about today is nostalgia. So we all know about nostalgia, this loss of something that we used to love and care about. Nostalgia is this loss of something that's here, but we've lost the solace that we cared so much about. So we might experience this going out into the places that we love and missing some of those things that we really loved about them. I was in the images last weekend and saw the burn scars over all these places that I love. And so we can have these things that really are near and dear to us or close to our identities that are just not the same anymore. And we're going to see that continue to change and potentially get worse in the future. So that's something that I thought might be impacting you all, and I think something that's going to be continually a part of this conversation. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So there are four main ways that climate change is going to impact mental health. One is kind of what we've already talked about the physical impacts. When we have increased cardiovascular disease, we have increased all of these physical diseases, that has a large impact on our mood. There's increased suicide, both as a direct result of air pollution and as an indirect result after increased disease. There's increased dementia, Alzheimer's. So we have those direct or indirect results after physical health problems. Then we have acute acute crises, so people directly impacted by environmental change crises, whether that's hurricanes, droughts, wildfires. And we see increases in PTSD, suicide as a result of those crises. And then as far as indirect crises go, we have the worry and concern that we all hear about the future that we're facing. And that can result in anxiety, depression, and a variety of other factors. And then finally, it's just this decreased quality of life. So whether that's a smaller ski season, feeling it's too hot to go outside, the air pollution impacting us, seeing the fire smoke up the mountain, we see these impacts directly. So we see both more crisis-oriented concerns that we're going to have to deal with in the mental health field, and then also more indirect physical and mental health impacts. We can go ahead and go to the first slide. Key jump. So mental health takes place, in fact, our human identity takes place in our systems. We are an individual, a family, a culture, and a broader environment. And climate change is going to disrupt each of these systems. So the people who are most vulnerable have the least environmental support, whether that's particularly crisis-prone environments like island nations, or it might be individuals without a lot of social support. So individuals who can't flee a wildfire, individuals who can't find another job after the ski season gets shorter. So when we're looking at mental health and climate change, we need to look at the whole system, from the individual and their psychological systems all the way out to the environmental systems. Go to the next slide. As far as resilience goes, and social resilience, there's a few key factors. The first one of those is access to resources. Obviously, if it's a hot day, we need to go inside, we need food, especially during food shortages, we need social resources. We also need governance, and we need to be able to connect to governance. So this is something that we saw in Maui just a few weeks ago, is there was really good connections between the local individual communities, the local governments, and the broader national government, and that's actually helped a lot as they recover from that crisis. That's really important for resilience. If there isn't good connection between communities and governments, it's really hard to respond. And what's difficult about climate change and mental health is you can't really quickly build mental health resources after a crisis. We can't go in and create a bunch of mental health communities or clinics directly after a wildfire. That's just, it's not quick enough. So we need to be having these things in place beforehand. Cultures, close relationships are particularly important. And finally, knowledge and information dissemination. And that's going to depend on the community. So like, you all might be able to understand and connect with what I'm talking about today, or you might not, but there are many communities that are going to not enjoy listening to me speak. And in fact, some of you might be in the room not enjoying listening to me speak. So it's important that we have information pathways directly to communities in ways that those communities enjoy and understand listening to. So that's really important. And go to the next slide. Okay, psychological vulnerabilities. One is a lack of social support and connection. We're going to keep coming back to that. Without that community, it's really hard to respond to something as this. The second one is ineffective strategies for dealing with thoughts and emotions. So when we think about going outside and being a lot worse, or we think about a feature maybe not looking the way we want it to, we might use some strategies that are less effective. So this might look like complete avoidance. Going outside, stopping whatever physical activity we enjoyed, or it might look like catastrophizing, checking the news feed every single day, looking at what crisis is next. It might be, just avoiding all of life's activities because we're so scared of this event. So that's another vulnerability. The third one is a strong connection to vulnerable places. If you are really connected to a place that's a big piece of your identity, particularly about indigenous communities, or a sense of place is so important, that can be a really big vulnerability if those places start to disappear. And then compounding personal stressors. If you have a work environment, a family environment that is no longer the same after one of these crises, or has changed year by year, that can be impactful. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so how it might look in Summit County, you can kind of think from the individual all the way up to the environment. as far as impacts go. So individual, there might be strong emotions, maybe disengagement from community places, from exercise. At the family level, we may lose some of our favorite ways to connect with our neighbors and loved ones. At the broader level, we may lose work and other sources of income. And then finally, at that largest level, we may lose a sense of community identity. If this community is not the same one that we grew up in, the same one we were connected to. We go to the next slide. And then, on a lighter note, the work that I do is with young people. So it's figuring out how to help young people deal with these challenging emotions and thoughts. And so the way we do that is I try to help young people situate themselves back in these systems. So to think about how to strengthen each of these systems, and then figure out how to cope with challenging thoughts and emotions, and figure out functionally what they can do and what they can't do. So there's functional ways to act as an individual and less functional ways to act as an individual. So for a young person, that might look like, rather than foregoing all social relationships and just deciding that there's going to be no future, instead maybe deciding on a career that's environmental justice oriented, taking small actions every day where they can create change, and then giving themselves some compassion for the stuff that they can't change. So that's kind of what that looks like from my perspective. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeremy. So next we'll pass it over to Tanya Kay. Next slide. Next slide. So, echo distress is everywhere. There's about 60 to 3/4% of all people that were surveyed between 2020 and 2023 was having distressful feelings about climate change. Children, it's more distressful, and young people are more distressful than adults. 45% of people from age 16 to 25 said that they were not functioning as well due to their feelings about climate change. Next slide. So in the past 10 years, the amount of people that have experienced eco-distress has remained about the same. About 70% of us have some feelings of eco-distress, but it's been a 14% increase in being alarmed about climate change versus just being concerned or cautious. And about 30% have stayed solid at disengaged, doubtful, and dismissive. So in reality, most of us are having some sort of distressful feelings about climate change. Next slide. Degrees of distress are from mild, like, yeah, I'm a little anxious, but somebody's going to take care of it, and I just don't even think about it, to so distressed that people aren't able to work, they are suicidal, at the very extreme, it's like, I'm going to kill my kids so they don't have to experience this horrible world that's coming up in the future. So those are the degrees. Next slide. I want to talk a little bit about the myth of apathy. I think a lot of you here probably are very invested in climate change, and you're wondering why other people aren't doing more. So Renee Litzman her PhD was to do studies of people in Wisconsin. And most of those people were rural. And what she found was that they weren't apathetic, they were anxious, and they had these aspirational ideas about what they wanted, and in the middle of that they felt ambivalent. So they didn't really know what to do, because the world that they wanted didn't exist, and so rather than apathy, they just kind of like are stuck in this limbo land. I think about this with my 2005 Prius. When I first bought it, it was like, yes, I'm helping the earth. And then I realized that there's mining issues and people who are being exploited for creating the battery in my car, and so now it's like, well, what do? My preference would be to not drive and have a infrastructure set up so I don't have to drive, but that doesn't exist. So there's this kind of being in limbo. Next slide. So solutions, according to Ashley Consolo, there are 5 solutions that organizations can look at. One would be training for health professionals on climate change, enhanced clinical assessments, and I think there's been a slew of clinical assessments that have been created lately to kind of assess how distressed people are about climate change. Already proven individual and group therapy strategies. Social prescribing are just actions that will help people feel better by doing things that will help the environment, and then a focus on the family. Like, if you are a parent, are you creating space and time for your children to talk about their feelings? And are you empathizing with them and allowing those feelings to be expressed? And then are you coming together as a family and figuring out what you can do to some sort of outward goal-directed activity that might help alleviate some of the stressful feelings that kids have. Next slide. Solutions and the role of individuals. So this is, so how many of you in here, by raise of hand, have had distressful feelings about climate change? And how many of you have talked about those distressful feelings with someone else? Thank you. Thank you. I think the biggest issue we have is that we're not talking about what we're experiencing. And this is a worldwide, global thing. We all are in this. We all are experiencing distressful feelings, and the most important part of that is to normalize it, not pathologize it. And so, talking about one's feelings in a supportive community, mindfulness and ACT therapy. ACT therapy is just mindfulness with an intention in the moment to move towards what you value. So being present in this moment, this is what we've got, this moment, so how are we going to act? Embodiment of difficult emotions, grief ceremonies and rituals, creativity. So I really feel like we need to think outside of the box when we're thinking about dealing with the mental health issues around climate change, because it's not that neoliberal individualistic thing where you're going to go see a therapist and work out all your issues and it's all going to be good. We need to develop ways that we engage in these feelings as a community, whatever that community is. There are a number of organizations that have kind of focused on that. And creativity, I am an art therapist, so creativity is like, yes, bring it on. Bill McKibben of ThirdAct.org says the most important thing you can do to fight climate change is to be less of an individual. And Shauna Jens is, our grief does not need healing, our healing needs our grief. We as a society don't feel anything distressful. We like to shut it off and compartmentalize it. And it's really easy to do that. There's so many things for us. But allowing that grief to kind of be a motivator, I think grief and anxiety are the start of the change that we need to mitigate climate change. And I feel this way because when I have any sort of change that I make, it's based on some sort of distress. If we're all feeling okay, we're not going to be motivated to act. So talking about that with others, getting those feelings out, helps other people not feel so isolated as well. You know, if 70%, 68% of adults are feeling some sort of anxiety about climate change, then if you're gonna talk to someone, they're probably gonna have similar feelings. I have a bunch of resources which will probably be available, I think, but I'll just go over them briefly. So if you have someone who's really struggling with suicide or just not functioning because of their feelings about climate change, there are organizations within this United States where people are certified and licensed to deal with climate issues. But there's also amazing support groups and retreats. So if you're just feeling a little distressed and you want to be with a group of people who also are feeling that distress, and kind of metabolize those feelings so you can actually feel more able to function. We have a lot of them. The last two on this list are actually in Utah. Embodiment Matters and New Moon Rites of Passage. And some of these are online. So next slide. A lot of new podcasts, guides, newsletters, videos. My favorite, Climate Change and Happiness. Love that title. If you just want to listen to someone talking about climate change and their distressful feelings, that's a great resource. Next slide. Lots of books. Lots and lots of books. The bottom 5 are written by people who have an indigenous heritage. And I think they have so many amazing things to say about how we can move forward. I think a big problem with climate change is we all have these distressful feelings and we don't know what the future is going to look like. It just feels overwhelming and scary. But they have these ways, they're trying to bring back the ways of community, the ways of connecting to the earth, the ways of being with everyone, and they have a lot of wisdom that I think is helpful in looking for a way forward.
Thank you, all three of you. So we can All right, so I actually don't have my cell phone on me, and this clock is definitely not showing the real time. How are we doing, Emily?
We are right on time.
Excellent. Okay, great. Well then, our next step is to kind of pass some time over to the audience. Does anybody have any questions? Just immediately offhand, right? We've got a question right here. I'll bring the mic.
Question for our public health expert. A little history. I'm 75. 80 years ago, my father was assigned to a medical research battalion in South Pacific studying malaria and dengue, which he got both during his tour there. The best we can do with climate change is stop it from getting worse by 2050. Are we doing anything in research to maybe make vaccines for some of those vector-borne and waterborne diseases?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I probably don't need the mic. My students always say they move to the back of the room so they can hear me better. There's actually quite a bit in terms of both treatment and vaccines for both dengue and malaria. As a matter of fact, we've got some researchers at the University of Utah that are doing some research on that. There is a new malaria vaccine that is right now being, that has just been licensed to be used in Ghana. And in Africa, they are starting to look at it. Of course, it's incredibly endemic, right, in that area. But yes, we are definitely working on vaccines and alternative treatments and therapies for that. So the field is definitely looking at that.
Question. I don't need. I just think of the novel, like the Cormac McCarthy novel, The Road, and the post-nuclear world, and the kind of mental reaction by communities to that new era. And I'm wondering if there are lessons that have been learned with respect to mental wellness that can be used in approaching the management of climate change impacts to mental health.
Yeah, I really appreciate that connection. And I think my main thought is don't stop living, because I think that was a reaction to both of these things, that it's like, the world's ending, we're just gonna stop, right? And I think there are so many beautiful things left to be done and lived. And so I think, and all throughout history, we've been facing crises. In fact, this is kind of a unique era in that we have the privilege of having safe food and clean water and all these things. So I think because this crisis is here, it doesn't mean we need to stop living. That's kind of my main thought.
So I have two thoughts. First one is Joanna Macy's The Gifts of Uncertainty, which I love, and it's be in this present moment, choose an intention in this present moment, be with the rest of the humanity that lives in here, be with your pain, and how can you hold, I think there needs to be an opening up of feelings and a way to hold your gratitude and your joy and your pain and your sorrow, one in each hand. And I think that takes some navigation, but when you're able to do that, there's a space of just like pure awe and gratitude for the moment that you have. So I think it's living moment to moment and choosing an intention in that moment and trying to connect with others. Because we are this is who we have, right? Yeah, I don't know if that's helpful.
That's great. And then I forgot one of my important duties. So we do have also this QR code, and some of you have submitted a few questions, so I might ask a few that came in from our audience here. And this might be a question for you teaching in the public health department, but we have a question: how is climate change being integrated into medical education, where you're currently in school and you both work at a academic medical center, and you can tell us a little bit more. And this is for doctors, nurses, psychologists, all of our health and allied health professionals.
So let me start with public health. Certainly we are integrating this into our educational program in public health. We talk about this in environmental health classes, and it's not something new, right? But a lot of this is talking about the sort of the acceleration of this and how we deal with that. For a long time in public health, we said we deal with the consequences, not with the causes, right? But we've gotten to a point where we need to deal with the causes as well, and we need to start being more proactive in terms of helping the community make the changes that are going to slow or decrease. I'm not going to say reverse, but at least slow or decrease the speed at which we are achieving, we are gaining these climate change impacts. I would say that in other physical health professions in medical school, they get a little bit of that, but not as much as we would like to see that happen. It's starting to take hold, but not. The medical school curriculum is so full that it's really hard to add anything to it, and so they're getting little snippets of it. They don't get enough public health either in medical school, so they'll get it in the little snippets of it through their public health coursework that they get. But it's coming. We're in the process.
Yeah, and actually, I might add to that. So I work at the University of Utah, and so I know I can't speak for every medical school in this country, but at our School of Medicine at the University of Utah, we have a group of students who has led what's called the Planetary Health Report Card, and that is a system that allows the students to go through and review all of the curriculum in the campus on a lot of different facets, and it gives a grade for your School of Medicine. And so our School of Medicine here at the U, our first grade was not great. It was a D. So room for improvement. And then we got a C minus, and now we're up to a C. So things are really moving along, but there are a number of schools of medicine across the country that are now using this Planetary Health Report Card to evaluate how they're doing on curriculum, and it's looking at these things. And just so you know, most schools are actually in that C range. To Kimberly's point, that there's definitely a lot of growth, or a lot of room for improvement, but from what I've learned from schools that are doing this successfully, they're starting to integrate this information into existing curriculum. So when they look at, for example, their pulmonology unit, they're talking about, okay, how does wildfire and air pollution affect our lungs? Or when they're looking at, they're in their OBGYN courses, they're talking about how extreme heat affects women who are pregnant. So that's where schools have had kind of the most success, I think, so far, but there's certainly a lot of room for improvement, but I think gratefully where we're seeing the push come from, at least at the University of Utah School of Medicine, is really from the students themselves. Anyway, sorry, I just had to insert myself there, but.
No, I was gonna say you have the most information on my end, so I was gonna turn the mic over to you, so
I don't have a lot, unfortunately. There's not been a lot done in my field currently. I hope that will change. It's slowly changing. I'm getting like little bits at conferences now, but it's a really small area for how big of an issue it's going to be in our field in 5 years. So.
Well, my next question that I have is kind of a question for the two of you. How is stress and anxiety tied to climate change similar to and different from stress and anxiety that people experience for other reasons?
Yeah,
I'm an introvert, so let me,
I can repeat it. So
while you answer, I'll come up with something to say.
Yeah. So it's similar in that I think it operates by similar mechanisms. So I'm an ACT therapist, so I generally take acceptance processes. Can we accept and feel these emotions, and then can we change the behavior that we want to change? So it's similar in that there is an external stressor causing an emotion, and people are responding to it maybe by avoidance or by internalizing all these emotions, feeling a lot of things. So it's similar in those ways. I think it's different in that a lot of people don't feel the same power to change. Social relationships, I can change how I interact with my roommates. I have a really easy way to engage. It's maybe more similar to racial issues or to other long-term issues like this, where it's going to require collective effort to make change. So I'd say it's different in that way, that we end up, the behavioral actions that we end up using are more collectively oriented rather than individually behaviorally oriented. I'm using jargon, and I apologize for that, but just the language that we see.
That sounded really good. I don't have anything to add.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's the chronicity of it, right? The fact that it's chronic and that it's ongoing. We see, when we see these kinds of impacts and the ongoing stressors, right? When there is no escape from the stressor, it's really hard to deal with the emotional reaction to that stressor. And so, I was gonna say similar to racism, right? The impact of racism. I don't have any control, it's ongoing. How do I manage that?
All right, I have one more question here. Do we have any specific recommendation for talking to kids about climate change? And I might just also broaden that and say other humans too, generally, of all ages, but we can start with kids.
We're all gonna look at you.
I have a rule that anyone below 18, I don't want to work with because I don't like working with parents. I love working with 18-year-olds. Yeah, with youth, but again, the 18 cutoff. And I hope my resources will trickle down to whoever's working with younger than that, but it just stresses me out to have to work with multiple people. But I think we need to be looking at a child's development, so thinking back to those systems that they're a part of, and thinking about what's appropriate for them. So if they're 6, we still want to be talking about these things, but they're going to be in more concrete terms and in more ways that they can control and think about how they want to approach the issues. So it can be a lot more simple conversation of, yes, I know you're scared about this. Can we talk about the emotions that you're feeling? And can we talk about how to comfort you feeling those emotions? A conversation with the 17-year-old is going to look a lot differently because it's going to be a lot more identity-oriented. It's going to be more individually I don't know, they want to go out and change something. So I think letting them guide a lot more of the conversation and what they want to do, letting them tell you about what they're feeling, again, is going to be really, really good. And I think it always comes back to comfort, because especially as parental figures or loving figures in their lives, being a place where they can talk about these things is going to be a really powerful experience for them.
Yeah, and I would just add, any way that they can express themselves other than words. You know, can they create an art image that kind of shows how they're feeling? Can they, you know, if they're musical, can they, you know, how can they express themselves? Because I know sometimes they have a difficult time really speaking, especially at a very young age. So finding different ways for them to get that out, to get their feelings out.
I also want to add is giving them something to do, some small way. I mean, for each and every one of us, right? What small way can we contribute to solving the problem? Because that feeling of there's nothing I can do to solve this is really distressing. And so for all of us, if there are things that we can do, even that smallest step, yes, driving your Prius is better than driving whatever gas, a Hummer, right?
If anyone drives a Hummer,
I'm sorry. My dad worked for 40 years for General Motors, I'm sorry. But, you know, anything that we can do and acknowledging those things that we do, I think is helpful for all of us. Because just seeing those images, how many of you remember the ad council ad of the Native American crying over the polluted river when we were kids, right? Yeah. Remember that feeling? Awful feeling, right? So the end of it, what can we do, right? Can we do something to make that better? And I think that that's just something that all of us, as we engage in doing whatever little bit we can, is really helpful.
I'll just share a little. So third act is doing kind of intergenerational thing where they're trying to connect young people with old people, and I have a friend who's 10, and I invited her to come be in a photo op with us, cutting up our credit cards that were from the credit companies that were giving loans to fossil fuels. So it was an opportunity for her to do something that she felt really powerful about, and she asked, where'd the photo go? And blah, blah, blah. So even though she's very small, she doesn't have a credit card, hopefully, she felt really powerful in doing that with me.
And I guess with creating change, especially at a young age, it doesn't have to be like, I like to change or put behaviors into two categories, environmentally friendly behaviors, kind of meaningful and impactful. So like, I was in here a few years ago, and I saw a great horned owl fall out of a tree, and it's a little baby, and it bruised its eye. So I called a rehabilitator, and they had me bring this in right? And so that particular behavior is not going to save the owl species, it's not going to change the collective system, but it's very meaningful to me. So there's a group of meaningful behaviors that can affect a small system, whether that's picking up litter, recycling, whatever small things that maybe aren't going to impact broader systems. And so I especially like to start with these meaningful behaviors. And then for some of us who already know a lot, Project Drawdown gives you some great behaviors if you really want to make a collective difference. Some of these things that can make a big difference for a lot of us do them. So those are kind of two areas that I like to operate in.
Perfect. And I would also add, the other thing that you can do is point to places where solutions are happening, because I think if you start to find those places and you can communicate that to young people, it also conveys a message of, well, okay, first we'll come to you and then we'll come back to you. You're good? Yeah, go for it.
I am also heading towards being a clinician, and I know you're in training and we've got art therapists up here, talking about these as communal issues that need communal solutions. What do you see the role of individual therapy being in this new era?
I think one, it's for the more severe end of the spectrum, as we talked about, people that have essentially stopped living in some way, creating some movement there, helping them figure out how to operate in these spaces. And then two, I think broad dissemination, trying to get basic resources to a lot of people. So like my course is an online course that I'm planning to implement into like Bio 100 courses in the long term. So then a lot of people have these skills before they need long-term therapy. So that's kind of my hope, is that we can operate on a collective big scale and then really help the individuals who need it most.
I teach environmental education to kids, all ages, but a lot K through 5. And fairly consistently, I get kids experiencing their anxiety because their parents aren't, I get to the kids to get to the parents, but the parents are not changing. And that's creating anxiety for the kids. Miss Mary, they're still using plastic bags. I can't get them to turn down the heat. They're still driving the monster car. We're still eating a lot of red meat. I mean, all these little things, their parents will not change, and that's creating stressors for the kids. So that's really hard. I mean, I try to just be really positive. Keep at it, you know. But that's another one. It's tough. It's a challenge to get to the parents.
Educational research has actually shown that while parents, it's not as effective as we all think about going through kids to get to their parents, because as parents we're just obnoxious and we just don't want to listen to our kids. And we're really tired of hearing Miss Mary said that we have to eat less meat, red meat, right? It's not really the most effective way, and so it is one of those things, but it is an avenue, right? It's one of those avenues, because they're so in touch with that, right, at that age, and really want to make a change and really want to help. So just Miss Mary, please keep doing it. But also think about, you know, the impact on those kids, because even if they see a little bit of change, just help them to acknowledge that little bit of change.
I don't know if this would be helpful, and I don't know, but one of the things that I read about as a way to talk to people who are on a different page than you as an adult is to say something like, you know, how long have you been doing this? You know, what is this about? Why is this important to you? I don't know if a kid could ask their parent that. Why is it important for you to eat meat? I don't know. Might open a conversation. If it's really bad, let me know.
Just wait till they become teenagers, and then it'll just.
Oh yeah, it goes through the toilet, yeah.
Yeah, this is why I don't work with kids. But I think, especially thinking about like older adolescents and adults, talking about where their energy is best spent. So talking about, as we talked about earlier, functional versus dysfunctional behavior. If we focus on this 30% that doesn't believe there's a lot on, we're going to spend all of our energy on that 30%. When there are so many better avenues for that energy to be spent, whether it's building good relationships, building communities, taking action. I think this could probably be tamed down to a smaller scale. Like, okay, maybe you can't change your parents' behavior around this, but what do you want to do differently? What are you going to have maybe with your dinner that's a burger, but maybe just a small thing that you can do? Or how would you like on your walk to pick up the trash? Just a small thing that helps them feel a little bit of autonomy and control in this broader system that maybe they don't have complete control over.
Right. There are positive stories too. I just want you to know, you know. We're composting now. My parents, you know, I try to encourage them, get reusable bags for their birthday or Christmas, you know. And so there are positive stories too, but I sometimes get the same students every year who keep working on their parents. And I know it creates stress for them, and I feel really bad, but they have to keep at it and be creative.
Yeah, they're working on those like lobbying skills tonight, right? Great, we've got a question right here.
Yeah, brought these different partners together to come up with different, I don't know, plans or action items?
If you met Ben Abbott at the last group, he's probably the best community organizer I know, and just an overall very good human being. But he has done some work that I work with him on, both with Utah Lake and Great Salt Lake, where we work together to try and get those initiatives out there and ultimately stopped the Utah Islands, or the Utah Lake Islands from being developed. So we see good change in those groups. So I've seen small groups, but they're informal and just a result of shared relationships rather than, I don't know if there'd be any groups that work together.
I would say the other group is, so the legislature has funded the Wilkes Center at the University of Utah, the Wilkes Center on Climate Change, and as they're working with a number of groups, right? The Utah Physicians for Healthy Environment and others around the community on looking at different issues around the environment and climate change, so.
Are they more individualized, like any different, like Utah Physicians for Healthy Environment? Most of these are quality, right?
Yeah.
Does any group, or has anyone thought of like looking at kind of the system as a whole? I think there's a nice little magnet and they showed kind of the interactions, or you need to look at it in kind of holistically.
Yeah, I know that Salt Lake City government recently got an EPA grant and to create an environmental justice working group. And so that is being convened in part with University Neighborhood Partners, which is a part of the University of Utah. And so that group is starting to pull together all of the environmental justice community organizations that are doing work. This is not specific, obviously, to Summit County. It's more in Salt Lake, and some of them are Utah-wide. And so they're trying to pull together all of these different kind of community organizations so that there's not duplicative efforts, and making sure that residents are getting engaged, and then they're also going to be creating a resident working committee. So there are a few things that are happening. There's also something that will be coming out. So the EPA has it's a thing called a TIC-TAC, so it's a Technical Grant Assistance Center. And our region is one of the only regions that hasn't yet developed one, and I believe there will be some entities that will be applying for that. So that will be are you with them?
I'm with Heal Utah.
Oh, you are, great. Hi.
I'd like to invite anyone to use Heal as a resource. We kind of do grassroots organizing all the way to policy, environmental justice. We kind of think of ourselves as like the filling between, climate anxiety and then individual meets community action. So yeah, Heal Utah, as well as, I'm sure you guys know a lot of other partners.
Yeah, Heal Utah is one of the groups that's in the environmental justice group. It's great, thanks for being here. So yeah, I would say that there are some things that are like, we're sort of at a point where there's a lot of momentum and resources that are starting to pull together, federal funding and community organizations and things like that. But I don't know that there's one entity, but I also think, if you have a particular cause that you're passionate about, you can certainly work in kind of a small group. We've got a question in the back.
I recently saw a documentary about Greta Thunberg in Sweden. What are your views about what she did, and do you think our younger generation have anything in them to do something similar to what she did?
Did she do something specifically recently?
This was like 5 years ago. When she was 15 years old,
Right.
she sort of sat by the roadside with a sign for climate change, and that started a whole movement. There's a documentary about it. I don't know the name of the documentary.
Yeah, so these are like the Friday strike for, school strike for climate, okay.
So repeat the question.
Question is, what are your views about what she did, and do you think our younger generation have it in them to do something similar, get involved in climate change? Or is the younger generation just saying, no, we don't care?
I think our younger generation is going to be our salvation in so many ways. I don't know. I think it's a lot of pressure that we put on them. But I think that every young person that I engage with, from whatever range, and I consider young people as up to mid-30s. They are so passionate about it, and I think they do have it in them. They're terrified. They're terrified about what their future holds for them. My kids are 32, and They've decided they're not having kids because they can't imagine bringing children into a world that is going to be as bad as it's going to be when their kids would be adults. And so there's a lot there, and they're moving forward to do a lot of different things. They're doing all kinds of things. So I do have some hope that our younger generation is going to. It's going to pull us out of this. Maybe not in time for us, but hopefully in time for them and their children.
I have a follow-up question to what you just said. Your kids have decided not to have children because of what's going on. That's a bit extreme that some people are going to, causing a reduction in population in more developed countries. The developing or the underdeveloped countries, the sub-Saharan African nations, they're still producing, they just can't keep those kids alive because of other reasons. Because they've been living with crises, natural environmental crises and other crises, are they better equipped emotionally to handle things like this?
You know, I don't know, go ahead. I'll let you answer that emotional question.
I feel like we have a lot more information these days that is disseminated widely as far as helping. I think about when I grew up, I thought Watergate was a gate with water. I mean, when I was 10. So I feel like there's a lot more information out for young adults and kids to be able to find things that are going to work for them.
And thinking about the global south, I mean, to a certain extent, yes, I think they are better prepared, right? Because they've had to experience it. Somebody earlier said something about, I started thinking about, maybe we are a little too privileged, right? We've had life a little too easy. None of us know what it's like to be hungry or to not have our car that we could jump into at any moment or turn the television on at any moment. And so when these crises hit us, I think they smack us in the face a little harder because we've not had those experiences. Think about my grandparents that lived through World War I and the Depression, right? They experienced those things on a regular basis. We see the same thing in medicine, right? Many of our clinicians have never seen chickenpox, measles, mumps, right? All of these diseases that, when my daughter got mumps because of an outbreak in California, and I sent her to the doctors to get diagnosed so she can get an absenteeism slip for work. The resident that saw her at UCLA Medical Center had never seen mumps and didn't know what she was talking about, right? And she's like, no, my mom says it's mumps. It's like, I have mumps. I know what mumps looks like, right? That resident had never seen mumps and didn't really know what mumps were. So I think that in some ways, certainly in the global south, where they experience these things on a much more regular basis, it's going to have much more impact on them, but I think they're also better prepared to be able to manage those things, emotionally at least. Right? The reason they have the resources, that's the big issue.
And for the clinical psychologists, are they doing anything in schools to prepare kids, especially after the pandemic? The kids over here, I have family in India, and my cousin's children handled it so much better than my neighbor's kids. Because they were so equipped to know that they have curfews over there, so they had to stay at home for 2 days. They knew how to entertain themselves. The kids over here have the technology, but then it's like, well, now I don't want technology, I want to go out and mingle, kind of a deal. The entitlement kind of came in the picture because they just wanted what they wanted. So are they doing something in school, especially after the pandemic, because we're seeing more and more psychological hurt in the new generation, just to prepare them for the next big thing to hit our small world, which is becoming smaller and smaller.
those techniques are starting to be built in schools, whether it's emotional regulation skills or some of the public psychology movements. But I think that's going to be something that's needed more and more is if you're used to living a lifestyle where you don't have to deal with very many distressing emotions, how can we function in a world where more of those emotions are present?
We've got more. More cards are coming, folks. There's something in your
Oh, we got more questions coming in.
We do.
Okay, so, all right, this one kind of goes along with some of what we've tried to do, but what is your go-to when you need to feel okay about the climate of the future? And okay is in quotes, when you need to feel okay. Maybe I'll go first.
Yeah, you go first.
I take a lot of, I think especially for those of us who work in this field all day, every day, like I'm thinking about this all the time, and that might be some of you who are in the audience too, and that can be overwhelming, but working in it all day, every day, all the time, I also see a lot of people who are really smart and really dedicated and are working really hard and are working at both individual but especially systemic levels to make change. And there's a lot of change that's happening. Here locally in our smaller institutions and then even nationally, there's lots of funding that's going towards this. Like there's a lot of things that are happening, and so I like to take heart that we often are like, oh, there's nothing happening, but that's actually not true. Like if you look around and talk to people, you'll find that there are institutions that are moving forward on renewable energy, or there are groups that are finding ways to recycle things that are harder to recycle, and there are groups that are making progress on meatless Mondays in their cafeteria at work. Like there's a lot of good that's happening, and I think we have just naturally, and I think that like the psychologists in the room will back this up, right? We as humans have this filter that tends to come on, and it's like we only see negative things and not positive things. If any of you have spouses, you probably know what I'm talking about. I think especially when it comes to climate change, that tends to be a similar filter that we apply. And there actually is a lot of good. We just sometimes have to broaden the filter a little bit.
I like, there's a psychologist, Thomas Doherty, who likes to say, the news is what's outside your door. So he says, the first thing you can do when you start to feel burned out and overwhelmed by this is take a break from looking at the news constantly and go spend some time outside. Just experience the nature around you, have some positive interactions, because it's really important that we stay engaged here, and burning out is not going to be an answer to that. I like that answer.
Yeah, I think that the most important part is that this is a long-term issue, and taking breaks and resting is an important part of the process. So whatever that is for you. For me, I'm going to Montana on Friday to see my sister who lives in the woods, and get to hear some bear stories from her, and then an hour of a comedy show every night. Right now I'm just finishing up Schitt's Creek. I'm very sad about that, but yeah.
I'm a preparedness person, so I do disasters. That's my area of study is disasters. And climate disasters just happens to be one of them. And so one of the things that I do is I add to my little preparedness things.
How big is your 48-hour kit?
Well, we don't do 48 hours. We do 96 hours. I actually do 4 to 7 days. So we have 4 to 7 days worth to be able to take with us and go kids. But I also have a good Utah pantry down in my basement. And I have, I moved from California. We didn't have any of those things. I was so excited to have a basement that I could put, food storage into. And I recently, last year, I redid my backyard and I planted a couple of fruit trees and put a couple of garden boxes in. And I don't have time to actually garden, but there's lots of things growing out there. Some of it are weeds, but there's also I did pick almost a half a bushel of peaches off of one tree that is only a year old. So that actually is part of what helps me, because We may not be able to stop it, right? But we are human beings, and human beings are really good at adaptation. And so let's think about how we can adapt and what kinds of things we can do to continue to live even though things are going on.
If I can I comment on that?
Yes, we have 5 minutes left,
Okay.
so yes.
I think we have, yes, climate change is one of our biggest challenges in that. We can defeat it if we work at it. But let's put it in perspective. 100 years ago, there was a lot more poverty, a lot more disease. Our wars were immensely more destructive, and we've made progress. We made a lot of progress in the last 100 years, and we can do it again.
Ooh, can we just end on that?
We could, but we have one more question.
Miss Mary has something to say about that.
This is positive. So this is getting back to what you said. So I was talking to my colleague today. She left, but she's 23, and we were talking about buying used clothes because I'm a thrifter. And she was saying that, you know, amongst the 23-year-olds, you see a TJ Maxx shirt or clothing, and it just looks cheap and uncool now. So thrifting is cool. And so I think it's going to, you know, Montana, most of you know about the kids in Montana who sued the government of Montana. You know, so I think the kids are shifting. So where it's going to be cool to be involved with climate. So
I think it already is.
It is. It's
Yeah.
shifting.
And
Yes, social change.
I think what's cool is, as we can see here, probably the best resource that you all have in this room is each other. And so as we connect as shareholders and community members, we're going to feel a lot more hope and just a lot more community. And so I think that's really cool that we're sitting up here, but ultimately the people who know your community best and your needs best are you. So I hope that you all continue to connect as a community.
Thank you again to our panelists, Kimberly, Jeremy, and Natanya, and thank you all for being a very gracious audience. I'm going to pass it back over to Phil from Summit County now to wrap us up.
Thank you. Well, Alexis, Kim, Jeremy, and Tanya, thank you for your time tonight. This is the moment where if you drive a Hummer, I'm going to excuse you. You can do so unscathed. So, it's been a great evening. We've had lots of support. We've had former council members here in Glen Wright. We have our deputy county manager here, Jana Young. We've had our board of health chair here earlier, Chris Cherniak. So it shows to you that there is a significant buy-in from leadership in the county. As noted up here, for the questions, it seems as though we got to most questions, but I'm sure there's a few topics that went untouched. Emily and Alexis are going to be on this screen, or Chris Cherniak show, our board of health chair, on October 3rd to continue this conversation. So if you're available and you have time, I would encourage you to tune into that and hear this conversation from Emily's perspective, our sustainability manager at the county, and then Alexis will give you some more context to it. This is, as I mentioned, it's been a great event, but it is not anything to do with me. It's due to the great team that you see seated in the back, and so I would be remiss if I did not give a thanks to them. So first, yes, thank you. Without a doubt, we took a vote, and it was unanimous that Emily is our team captain. She makes sure that everything goes down. Without question, Aaron Newman is our director of mental and behavioral health at the county health department. He stepped in and really helped gather some of our behavioral and mental health resources for this event. We have Paige Mitchell in the back. She is with our health promotion team. She has been a convener of people as well, and we appreciate that. We have Bailey right here. She has been an absolute marketing genius. I hear that there's another person in the crowd that may have helped with that, but we'll leave out of the name. But Bailey has been phenomenal. From day one, she has helped really get this off the starting line and into the community. Isaac Cortez in the back, he's the next guy. When they say next slide.
Thank you.
We appreciate Isaac. Darcy Glenn is not here, but she was a former Park City Municipal employee, and then we stole her over to the health department. And then she is now at Woodwell, and we just learned that she's going to New Zealand to study for her PhD program. So she is actually the one that led out on the climate risk assessment that really spawned or spurred this entire discussion that we're having. And then last but not least, it is his last day with the county, but Zach Darby. Zach and Emily made sustainability happen in Summit County. We're grateful for them. But Zach has taken the job with the BLM and is the regional aquatic ecologist. Did I get that right? Yeah. And so definitely onward and upward for him. We're grateful for the contribution he's had here. And if you didn't know, Zach just finished a 100-mile race a couple weekends back. And a few of us followed him through the evening. We vicariously ran through him from our couches or under our sheets, texting each other, watching Zach make progress. But Zach, we wish you the best. Thanks for all your contribution here and what you've done. And so last but not least, thanks to each of you. It's great to spend the evening with like-minded individuals, with professionals in this field, really helping us deal with some of the stressors and anxieties that we feel around this and helping empower us to feel that we actually can help change happen and create a better world for our kids. I know it's one of my driving forces of my children, and so when we talk about this and the world we leave them, the decisions that we make today, the conversations that we have today are going to directly affect them and my grandchildren. So let's do what we can today. I